The episode begins with Thor's Snorresson waking up in a sunlit field surrounded by trees and grassy plains, where he is greeted from a distance by his wife Helga holding their infant child Ylva. Thor finds he is surrounded by dead as he walks to meet her. Thorkel, Thor's colleague, shouts at him to restore his attention. Thor and Thorkel easily slew foes who boarded their ship, and it is revealed that they took part in the Battle of Hjörungavagur in 987. Thorkel inquires about Thor's well-being due to his initial lack of attention, and Thor apologizes for daydreaming. They immediately protect themselves from a hail of arrows, and Thor observes that his soldiers will be unable to repel the enemy's second wave of attack because they are too dispersed. Thor comes up with a solution. Thorkel will bring up the front line as Floki approaches while attacking the enemy. Thor separates from Thorkel and boards another ship to face the enemy alone. Thor effortlessly dispatches the army and watches his victim apologize to his loved one for dying. Thor is struck in the right shoulder by an arrow while distracted, and additional foes board the ship to assault. An adversary knocks his blade from his grasp, but Thor pushes both the attacker and himself out into the water. They start wrestling underwater, and Thor wins by taking the man's sword and impaling him. Thor throws down the man's sword and swims away from the fighting to dry land. Thor walks away from the combat, exhausted, without looking back. Later, in the year 1002, Thor's young son, Thorfinn, collects water and transports it to his hamlet in Iceland. His sister, Ylva, asks him to feed their sheep and milk their cows once he has stored the water. Thorfinn notices a seabird and stares out to sea while carrying a pail of milk. Later that night, Leif Erikson and the other village youngsters congregate at Thor's home to hear Leif's voyage adventures. Leif narrates a story about how he and his men discovered a new continent after leaving Markland by traveling farther south. Leif characterized this new place as a new planet with fruit trees and green plains. He chose the name Vinland for this new land. Thorfinn compliments Leif on his abilities, and the youngsters quiz him about Vinland. Leif claims that Vinland is more larger and warmer than Iceland, and that he met a group of people who had previously lived there. Despite difficulties speaking owing to the language barrier, they were able to maintain cordial relations. Leif displays a feather headdress and a tobacco pipe he got as a gift from the natives. Simultaneously, Thor gets home from the snowfall, puzzled as to why the children are still awake. Helga expresses her desire for them to hear Leif's stories. Thorfinn compliments Leif and asks him if he wants to sail with him when he grows older, but Thorfinn replies he wants to sail now. One of the youngsters doubts Leif's account since tradition has it that the world serpent of the sea, Jormungand, devour any ship that dares to travel west, and beyond that, the world ends. Leif views it as proof that he is a genuine warrior, but the youngsters dismiss him as an adventurer who is inept in warfare. Leif requests that Thor smack some sense into the lads, but Thor thinks that's enough stories for one day and instructs Ari to accompany the kids home. Meanwhile, a man with a chain around his neck travels unprotected through the chilly snowfall and arrives into the Iceland settlement. With the kids gone, Leif and Thor discuss the frigid weather in Greenland that killed numerous people. According to Leif, this winter will be particularly cold and cattle will perish. Then Ylva goes home with 2 sheep, the only ones suffering from the cold. Leif offers to warm up Ylva, prompting her to refer to him as a pervert. Ylva advises Helga to rest before catching another illness, but Helga insists that she is okay and requests assistance in tying up the sheep. Leif informs Thor that living in Iceland is difficult, and Thor agrees. According to Leif, one day winter would be so frigid that no one will live. Back in his own nation, he claims that his brother, Thorvald, is intending to depart Greenland. Thor believes it's far, but Leif claims to have done the round journey before. Thorfinn then has a dream in which he is a sailor sailing to Vinland and meets Jormungand, but he is startled awake by Ylva laying on him. Thorfinn wakes Ylva awake and tells her she needs to sleep in her own bed since there isn't enough room in the shared one, but she refuses. Thorfinn observes Thor and Leif are still conversing, but Ylva urges him not to worry about grown-up matters. Then she tells Thorfinn to hug her and squeezes him tightly, much to Thorfinn's chagrin. Thor and Ylva are shoveling the snow that fell during the winter off their roof the next morning. Ylva complains about the hard labor and suggests that they hire a slave because Helga is ill and must now assist with housework. Thor claims that she requests a slave every year and that their family has fared fine without one. Ylva calls her father strange and falls off the roof by mistake. Thor rushes to Ylva's rescue, but she is unhurt. But she feels something beneath the snow and tries to find out what it is. Thor and Ylva come across the slave from earlier, who is asleep in the snow. Thorfinn sits on top of Leif's ship and asks the sailor whether his narrative is genuine. Leif screams passionately that he was being truthful. Thorfinn declares that if Leif allows him to embark aboard his ship, he will believe in Vinland. Leif tells him that's not believing and invites him to travel aboard his father's much larger and faster fleet. Thorfinn claims that no matter how many times he asks, his father would not allow him. Thor's, according to Leif, is attempting to protect him since the water is extremely hazardous. Leif chooses to tell Thorfinn a story from his past. When Leif was young, his ship became caught in an ice floe in a bay near Brattahlid for a whole month due to his carelessness. He and his crew suddenly ran out of food and had to eat ice to quench their thirst and hunger. Leif and his crew decided to try to escape by walking on the ice after the ice had wrecked their ship. Leif learned he was alone after traveling for 2 nights and that the other 6 members of his crew had died. Thorfinn stares out to sea and wonders why they traveled so far north to live on the frigid island of Iceland. Leif informs him that their Norwegian forefathers left. Leif claims that his forefathers spent decades in Norway, which was considerably warmer than Iceland and sheltered by several fjords. But then Harald, a powerful guy, emerged. Harald's army conquered communities from coast to coast, and he called himself the first king of Norway. He issued an ultimatum to the Norwegian people: either surrender and serve him, or leave Norway. Many individuals despised Harald's rule and preferred to flee. They sailed far west, beyond Harald's grasp, and landed in Iceland. Thorfinn, on the other hand, does not think their forebears would flee and accuses Leif of lying before returning home. Simultaneously, Thors leads the unconscious slave into his home and instructs Helga to boil some water and Ylva to fetch their fur blanket. Thors brings the slave near the fire, removes his clothing, and examines his whip marks. Ylva worries the guy will die as his limbs decay while Thors conducts chest compressions. Helga notices he isn't from their hamlet and wonders why he is out in the snow. Ylva claims that he is clearly an escaped slave, and that if they help him, his owner would make trouble in their hamlet. Thorfinn comes home and attempts to inform his father what Leif said, but instead finds him attempting to revive the slave. Thorfinn inquires about the man, and Ylva responds that he is a fugitive slave. To everyone's amazement, the slave awakens and gasps for air. Thors inquires about his name, but the guy responds that he is chilly. Thors orders Ylva to strengthen the fire and inquires about the slave's origins. The slave just requests that they return him to Halfdan. If he is Halfdan, Ylva believes he must have come from the opposite side of the mountain. As he tears, the slave vows he never wants to return to Halfdan, but he doesn't have any place else to go. Suddenly, a guy enters and warns Thors that Halfdan and over 30 of his men are at the pier, and he is the only one who can handle him. According to the man, they reference the slave and force their way onto the beach. He claims that Leif is attempting to interfere, but that the younger men may start a fight. Halfdan informs Leif and the locals at the docks that the only thing that can make a person seem nice is chains. Halfdan informs the villagers that one of his slaves cut his chain and escaped last night and asks whether they have seen him. Ari pulls his blade and claims that Halfdan is using this as an opportunity to settle a score with their town. One of the peasants informs Leif that their village and Halfdan's had previous clashes over grazing field boundaries. Halfdan's villagers appear to enjoy invading their domain and harvesting their grass for their own cattle. Because too many individuals were injured in their conflicts, the 2 communities agreed to terminate their feud at the final Viking gathering. Halfdan's soldiers know Ari from a previous fight and is still enraged that the youngster severed his left arm. Ari responds that the man severed his brother's leg. Leif and one of Halfdan's soldiers step in to break up the brawl. Ari vows to revenge his brother's disabilities by chopping off the man's leg. The guy pulls his sword and declares that their laws are ineffective. Halfdan uses his chain to disarm his subordinate's sword before he can attack. Halfdan declares that he will chain him and wraps his chain around the man's face before violently yanking it off, leaving bloody marks on his face. Halfdan claims that he will not allow anyone disobeying the law since the law is a chain that keeps men from becoming savages. Halfdan explains that the escaped slave is a young guy of Slavic ethnicity and asks whether anyone has seen him. The Slavic guy dreams of being in a field surrounded by flowers, trees, and birds. He smiles and says he has never felt more at ease. Thors awakens him and warns him that if he does not stay awake, he would die, but Helga believes it is too late for him. The young guy suddenly shouts out to his parents and sister, wondering where he is. Thors informs him that Vinland, a pleasant, lush paradise devoid of slaves and violence, is far to the west, over the sea. Thors asks the man whether he and his family will one day live there. Vinland, according to the young guy, is the paradise he witnessed before. Halfdan and his men burst into Thor's home and apologize for being so disrespectful, claiming they came for the slave. Thorfinn is taken away by Helga, and Ylva returns home, stating that she alerted Halfdan of the slave's presence. She attempts to explain that they weren't concealing him and that they were merely nursing him back to health. Thors inquires of Halfdan the cost of the slave. According to Halfdan, it cost him 2 young ewes. Thors offers 3 lambs in exchange for a slave, but Halfdan says he must take him back to torture him as a warning to the other captives. Thors instead offers 4 lambs, but Halfdan challenges Thors to tell him what he would do if he asked for twice as much. Thors says he'd offer 8 sheep, all ewes under the age of 3. Halfdan claims the slave is half dead, but he will accept Thor's offer. Halfdan turns to go, saying he'll find the sheep himself. Before leaving, Halfdan asks Thors if he truly believes he liberated the guy and where he would go, but Thors remains mute. Thorfinn peers through the sheet at Thors. Thors digs a grave later that night, and Ylva sobs. Thorfinn asks whether she is sorry, to which Ylva responds, "Of course I am," suggesting that the young man died soon after and that giving up the 8 sheep for him was worthless. Helga consoles Ylva, and Thorfinn inquires of Thors whether their forefathers truly fled as Leif said. Thors verifies it, and Thorfinn wonders where they would go if they left Iceland. Thors pats his youngster on the back while gazing at the northern lights. Meanwhile, Floki and a crew of Vikings leave sail towards Iceland, and the camera pans out to Thor's residence, where a chest carrying Viking equipment can be seen. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.